Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to dive into one of the most high-stakes succession battles you'll ever find. A story about a dying king, a court that's totally divided, and a son's desperate grab for a throne that was actually promised to someone else. This is the dramatic rise of Solomon, right from the first book of Kings.
So, our story kicks off with a kingdom in crisis. The legendary warrior king, David, he's just a shadow of who he once was. He's frail, he's weak, he can't even rule anymore. The center of power is just fading. And as we all know, nature hates a vacuum.
And this single question right here, it sets the stage for what is basically a political thriller. It's a high-stakes game for the throne of Israel, and it's filled with ambition, loyalty, and of course, betrayal.
Okay, so in this explainer, we're going to walk through the first 5 chapters, step by step, to see exactly how Solomon's reign got started against some pretty tough odds. We'll look at the succession crisis, a dying king's last words, that divine gift of wisdom, and the beginning of a true golden age. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so David is, for all intents and purposes, out of the picture. And his oldest living son, a guy named Adonijah, he decides, you know what, this is my moment. He doesn't bother waiting for his dad's blessing. He just decides he's going to seize the crown for himself.
And Adonijah is not subtle about this at all. He gathers up chariots, horsemen, and some really powerful allies, and he throws himself what is basically a coronation party. He's trying to create a new reality, hoping that by the time his sick old father finds out, it'll be too late to do anything about it.
And just like that, the kingdom's leadership is split right down the middle. It's dangerous. Adonijah gets Joab, the powerful, kind of ruthless army commander, and Abiathar, a high-ranking priest. He gets the old guard on his side. But you gotta notice who wasn't invited to this party. Nathan the prophet, Zadok the priest, and David's most loyal soldiers. The very people who knew who David really wanted to be king.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this political strategy. It's brilliant. Nathan the prophet sets up this clever two-step play. First, he sends in Bathsheba, Solomon's mom, to appeal to David personally, to remind him of the promise, the oath he swore to her. And then, right after he walks in to officially confirm her story, basically forcing the king to deal with this clear and present danger to his chosen successor.
And guess what? It works. It absolutely works. David is shaken out of his haze and spurred into action. And he doesn't just whisper it either. He makes a public, totally ironclad declaration, reaffirming his promise to God and to Bathsheba. The next king will be Solomon, period.
And they don't waste a second. David's command is carried out immediately. Solomon is put on the king's own mule, which is a huge symbolic deal, and he's anointed in this massive public ceremony. The celebration is so loud that the sound literally echoes across the valley to where Adonijah is having his little party, completely drowning out his phony claim to power. The coup just fizzles out before it even gets off the ground.
So, what's the big takeaway from this first chapter? It's all about God's faithfulness. I mean, despite all the human plotting and how close Adonijah came to succeeding, God's promise that David's heir would be the one to rule, it wins out. It's just a powerful lesson on divine will versus human ambition.
All right, let's move on to chapter 2. Solomon's been anointed, but now the dying David gives his son one last, very serious charge. And this is not just some fatherly advice, it's a political roadmap for the future of the entire nation. This is such a fascinating mix of spiritual guidance and some seriously sharp political strategy. The most important command, of course, is to obey God. But David, who was a warrior and a king for decades, he knows that just being pious isn't enough to secure the throne. He gives Solomon a to-do list, a mandate to clean house, to finally bring justice to dangerous men whose old betrayals could easily spark a civil war. He's making sure the new kingdom is built on a rock-solid foundation of stability.
And with that, after a monumental 40-year reign, David dies. The torch has officially been passed. Solomon is now sitting on his father's throne, and it's up to him to secure the kingdom.
But the threats aren't gone yet. Adonijah, who had been pardoned, decides to make another play for power, but this time he tries to be sneaky about it. He asks to marry Abishag, the young woman who took care of David in his final days. Now, this was not a love story. In that culture, taking one of the former king's concubines was a straight-up, undeniable claim to the throne.
Solomon, proving he's got that wisdom, sees right through it. He is not fooled for a second. His response shows he knows exactly what kind of political game is being played. He recognizes this for what it is, another treasonous attempt at a coup.
And he knows that for there to be peace, he has to act, and act decisively.
So, Solomon gets to work, systematically carrying out his father's final commands. He removes every single threat with this brutal efficiency. Adonijah, Joab, and eventually Shimei are executed. The priest Abiathar is banished. Now this might seem harsh, but it's not senseless cruelty. It's the cold, hard math of leadership, of establishing justice and making sure that old conflicts won't blow up the new era of peace. The kingdom is now truly and firmly in his hands.
Okay, so the kingdom is now militarily and politically secure. But now comes the really hard part, right? How do you actually govern? How do you lead a nation wisely? Well, in a moment of real humility, Solomon turns to God for the answer.
So, in a dream, God appears to Solomon and basically gives him a blank check. Ask for whatever you want. Anything. But Solomon doesn't ask for a long life, or for tons of money, or for victory over his enemies. He asks for wisdom. He asks for an understanding heart, so he can govern his people with justice and figure out the difference between right and wrong.
And this moment just brilliantly illustrates this profound spiritual principle. Because Solomon put the right thing first. Not his own personal gain, but the well-being of his people and the ability to rule justly, God was so pleased that he gave him not just what he asked for, but also everything he didn't ask for.
So with God's blessing of wisdom, Solomon's reign kicks off an era of peace, prosperity, and order that was just unprecedented. The wisdom he prayed for is now being put into practice, and it is completely transforming the nation.
Just look at this structure for a minute. This is what wisdom looks like in action. Solomon creates this sophisticated, organized government, putting specific leaders in charge of every key department. Then, and this is brilliant, he divides the whole kingdom into 12 districts, and each district is responsible for supplying the royal court for just 1 month out of the year. This isn't just bureaucracy. This is the actual architecture of a stable, peaceful, and well-fed nation.
And finally, with the kingdom peaceful and prosperous, Solomon turns his attention to fulfilling his father David's greatest dream, building a magnificent, permanent temple for the Lord in Jerusalem. But a project this huge requires more than just wanting it. It takes international diplomacy. Solomon uses his wisdom to forge a critical trade alliance with King Hiram of Tyre, who is a good friend of his father. He secures those legendary cedars of Lebanon and the expert craftsmen needed to build a structure worthy of God. And Hiram's joyful response just goes to show you that Solomon's reputation for wisdom had already spread far, far beyond Israel's borders. So, from this really shaky start and a contested throne, Solomon secured his kingdom and laid the foundation for a golden age. These early chapters show us a clear progression. Peace comes through justice, and prosperity is built on a foundation of divine wisdom. And all of this leaves us with the central question of his entire story. What is the true measure of a great leader? Is it the power they have, or the wealth they pile up? Or is it the wisdom they seek and the justice they